We have another rundown for you. We're getting into the depths, if you will, of the Boston Fleet, plus PWHL TakeOver Tour stops. We want to hear from you. Where do you think the league should go next?
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On NHL channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you women's hockey talk every Saturday. L Ayala here alongside Rachel Donner. Thank you so much for making us your first listen, your midday listen, or your late night listen. We appreciate you so much. And because we do share this with the Locked On NHL channel, make sure you are giving a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, and comments, subscriptions, of course, anything that reviews that you can leave on the Locked On NHL channel to let them know that you are tapped into women's hockey is much appreciated. And this episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Once again, a big show here as we get into all things Boston Fleet here. Rachel, I mean, hey, got a little dance. Not everything got a little shimmy shake, a little dance there.
It's true. It's true.
We're feeling it. We're ready to dive in here. Another episode, of course, later in the show, we will talk about how the team roster has changed. Pretty significant one. We've talked about it a few times. We'll get into it a few more times, I'm sure, on today's episode. And then Dream Takeover Tour stops. We got a little bit of news, some reporters pulling things together from season ticket holders. We have an idea of how many unidentified home games there may be. So maybe those are takeover games. We'll talk about that later. But we got to get into this. The Boston Fleet. Big storylines, you think, wrapping up season 2, Rachel. What you got?
Yeah, the Boston Fleet are such a fascinating team. That's why I was doing a little dance, because I think they were doing a little dance this season in terms of like teasing the league that they may be in it, right? Because you look at the league standings in February, they were doing absolutely great, right?
Yep.
They have one of the top scorers in the league in Hillary Knight. She wound up being the top point getter, or at least tied for that. She was second in goals to Marie-Philippe Poulin. So one of the top forwards and one of the top goaltenders in the league in Aerin Frankel. And yet this team did not make the playoffs.
Yeah, it was kind of wild, maddening at times to see that this Boston team, like you said, had so much potential and then just couldn't get it together. Now, I mean, the obvious question then to ask is, Rachel, what do we think contributed to their inability to find their way into the postseason?
Yeah, I think some injuries certainly did not do them any favors. I would say the Hannah Bilka injury in particular was huge, right? Just a huge part of that team. But, you know, ultimately it was their overall lack of scoring at the tail end of the season that did them in. That last game against the Minnesota Frost, where it was for all the marbles with like all the teams in play, right? They lost 8-1. Like, you're in a do or die, you win, you're in situation, and to lose, not just like if they had lost, 4-3 in overtime. Okay. They tried, right? No, that was brutal. That was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about that. I'll go back to Bilka in just a moment, but we talked about that because you also talked about Aerin Frankel and how important Aerin Frankel had been throughout this season. And we talked about it then. We'll talk about it again now. There was a choice made even after Frankel was coming back from injury to try and give her this game. And on the one hand, you ride with who got you there completely. We hear that in sports all the time. On the other hand, if you're going to ride with who got you there anyway, maybe if you're not riding with them because they're hurt, maybe you start somebody else and then let them finish. I don't know. I just, it was an odd choice given that there were other options.
And she got pulled anyway in that game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much more we want to litigate this, but I mean, your thoughts as we're now, a few months removed from that decision.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it too on that particular day. Now, you look at the games since they came back from Worlds, right? Everybody had 3 games left at the tail end of the season. They had lost the previous game in overtime to Montreal. They only won 1 of those 3 games after the break. So, there were bigger fish to fry issues overall, but that decision certainly had something to do with that last game, I would say.
Yeah, indeed. I think Hannah Bilka, as you mentioned, that injury there, played, 16 games, there had, 11 points, I believe, Rachel, on the season. Mm-hmm. So you talk about scoring kind of depleted. That's someone that was able to, in 16 games, be able to get some productivity. And so that's a huge loss. We saw them, have players like Kelly Babstock come in, Jillian Dempsey on the team, the now retired Jillian Dempsey, her the best. We talked about that on the last episode, but just never could really get things moving. It's going to be interesting for this team because there is a lot of movement. Now, on the one hand, Rachel, every team was impacted by 2 expansion teams entering. So there's that. But then some teams also had some personnel changes, and Boston is one of them. Let's just talk about it. Courtney Kessel, first, how would you assess 2 seasons under Kessel for Boston?
I think she did fine. I don't think she did anything to enhance the assets that she had. I think they played well on their own, but I don't think it was anything in particular that she did to make the team play better than the group of players that were there. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and on the one hand, I think that we've seen coaches that have seemed to be maybe trying to punch above their weight when it came to managing talent on their team, whether that was because the talent wasn't particularly curated properly or that they just didn't have the skill set to manage that talent, maybe a little bit of both in some circumstances. But what I hear you saying is that it wasn't so much that, it was more so that perhaps there were other coaching staffs that were able to not just take what they had and go with that raw talent, but curate it a little bit.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's not just, Teresa Vanishova, I'll just use Ottawa as an example, playing with anybody, whether they had former past history or not, but playing with the best players on that Ottawa Charge team, just as an example. That was just the name that came up. I love Vanishova's game, so it's probably not surprising that that's the random name that popped into my head. I also was looking at that video where she was like, ain't nobody trying to hit, knuckle up without gloves, and she's not fighting anymore in the PWHL. That was a funny video. Anyway, so that's interesting. And I think it's something, I hope, honestly, it's something where we can get a little more nuanced as the league continues to grow and the teams, the players, the coaches, everyone really just gets a little bit more acclimated. Because I think we could probably say that about a few coaches or maybe even specific spots on teams where nothing was necessarily enhanced, which is not terrible, but it also doesn't, you're not likely to, be successful long-term over teams that are able to enhance what they have. So anyway, I think that's a really sound point and an important one. So that did lead to a coaching change. We've talked about coaches broadly speaking, but what do we know about Chris Spar, who will take over for Courtney Kessel, who is headed to Princeton?
Right. So we talked about Chris when he was hired that he comes from men's hockey. His last job was with the San Diego Gulls and the AHL as an assistant coach. He hasn't had head coaching experience for quite a while. You know, his last job in the OHL before that, he was an associate coach, right? So he's dealt with men and boys in a not head coaching role and no women's game experience. And, you know, this was part of a larger conversation we had about like, where are they finding these coaches and where's the pipeline for women? And so to lose a woman head coach in the PWHL for a man with no women's hockey or head coaching recent experience is a difficult pill to swallow. And can he overcome that problem we just talked about with Courtney Kessel? It's not clear, not clear at all.
Yeah, again, that conversation really highlights what we'll be keeping an eye out for with Boston. I mean, everyone's got to get their first head coaching experience at some point in time. That's a fact.
But why is it in the top flight women's league in the world ostensibly?
I mean, again, just offering up what we know to be facts. And yes, those are the questions that need to be answered. It could work out splendidly. I've talked about Chad Wiseman is someone who really impressed me. And I think a part of that was because there was a humility and he was humble and was willing to learn, and he put in a lot of time. But he also came in with a vision. If you listen to those Riveters, the OG Riveters in season 1 of the National Women's Hockey League that then transitioned to the PHF, what he was telling those players is that we have a 3-year goal. We have a 3-year plan to get to a championship. And lo and behold, the Riveters won their championship in season number 3. So again, we don't know what side of the coin, or will it fall somewhere in the middle here, but we are definitely going to talk about it either way. What we're also going to talk about, Rachel, are the additions to the team by way of the draft and free agency. But we first have to talk about who made room for those new players, and that came through expansion draft and free agency before we talk about our dream takeover tour stops on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
We have all been there. You log on, you're sitting in that ticket queue waiting forever for those concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose out on the show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that is where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, and prices actually drop the closer it gets to showtime. You can save up to 60% off with killer last-minute deals. And if you wonder what your seat view is going to look like before you buy, the app shows you exactly in a panoramic view, so there's no surprises. Worried about what happens if your plans change? The Gametime guarantee has your back with cancellation, protection, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
We're back with another installment of the Women's Hockey Report. Erica L Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, alongside Rachel Donner, one of your co-hosts of the Locked On Flyers podcast, as well as your Friday co-host, alongside Gil Martin of Locked On NHL. But we're here to talk about the women's hockey. We talked about what are some of the things that maybe led to Boston not being able to find their way into the playoffs despite a strong start. We also ended that first part of the conversation, Rachel, of course, talking about the coaching change. But there were other changes that happened as well, some by the nature of free agency, others because of the entry draft. And then, of course, there was the expansion draft. And we usually start there. And I think this is probably where we're going to have to start for Boston as well, if only because the aforementioned Hillary Knight, one of the greatest to ever suit up for USA Hockey, if not the international stage altogether. I'm thinking it's both for sure. No longer a member of the Boston Fleet.
Yeah, that was such a crazy, crazy thing to happen. Now, is it truly unexpected? No. Like the tea leaves were there 100% based on clues. I felt like a Swiftie trying to look at the clues there in this case. But honestly, like Hilary Knight has been the face of Boston women's professional hockey for these many years. And so for her to leave Boston, I think it was a huge deal, a seismic shift. She went to Seattle in the expansion free agency project. And in some other cases there, Hannah Bilka, who is now come back from injury, right? She also signed in Seattle. So the two of them are reunited there. But, so when you lose a top scorer like that and a huge part of your offense in addition, that's really tough. But their blue line just took a beating with Sydney Moran, Emily Brown, Sydney Bard, Emma Greco, to name a few. Like, that is huge. Like, I don't know what they're going to do on the blue line. I mean, I do know what they're going to do because, we know who they've signed and who they drafted, but is it going to work is a huge question because like to have to start from scratch is really difficult.
Yeah, and we'll talk about those as well, but we're just talking about the initial blows because to go back to Fleet fans, they didn't know necessarily what was coming in the door, but they were seeing what was going out.
Exactly.
Especially by way of the expansion draft. Alexia Gia also going to PWHL Seattle through free agency. And then, you talked about defense, right? But we also have to talk about goaltending. They had two goaltenders that opted to not stay in the PWHL, but return to Europe to play.
Yeah, we had that conversation about Aerin Frankel and was it the right move to put her in that game in particular? And love Aerin Frankel. She's a tremendous goaltender, and there's a reason why she's your top goaltender, right? But what it does also do is prevent other goaltenders from getting opportunities. And you saw that, like Emma Soderberg, to be fair, she struggled. Like, I think it's fair, for her to have taken a step back and she went back to Europe. I honestly think that makes sense for her. So, and I bear her no ill will. I'm a huge fan, honestly. But Klara Feslerova should have had a job in the PWHL, and she decided to go back to Europe too. And that's a real shame.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about goaltending before. We will talk about goaltending specifically for the Boston Fleet a little bit later on the show. But, this is going to be an interesting time, I think, Rachel, for the PWHL, because, yes, they have added 2 teams, and I think we are seeing the market start to readjust to a new women's hockey league. Now, some of that will be players, whether, you talk about Peslarova, whether we talk about, Dominika Lashkova, who's also going back to Europe, was injured for a while, didn't see a lot of action. What are the factors? What are the variables that are getting some players from Europe to come to the PWHL and vice versa? Is it a matter of finding a better fit for maybe where they are in their professional career? Is it they just want to be closer to home? Is it regarding finances or some of the things afforded in a league? And those are things that hopefully we'll start to unearth as we talk to players once we get closer to the season, etc. But definitely wanted to mention that because I hope that we can continue to explore that. And again, some of it might just be that it is an open market, and that is perfectly fine too. We love it. We love choices for women. Okay, period. So moving on, Rachel, we talked about a few returners, but I think there are some names here that potentially you can see where the organization wants to go, maybe how they want to play. And there was no one on this Boston Fleet team for me, once we kind of saw, as you said, the writing was on the wall with Hilary Knight, that made more sense to me to protect than, honestly, if we're looking at forwards alone, Susanna Tapani was top of my list.
Yeah, it's interesting because she wasn't a protected player, but to me, one of the more important elements of that offense there, in addition to Alina Mueller, who was protected, you had Shea Maloney in that group. and as far as the forwards go. But I do think, once the dust had settled from Hillary Knight leaving, they did do a really good job of contract extensions for their existing forwards, trying to keep as much of the core together as they could.
Yeah, 100%. Schwabsal is a player I'm very eager to see blossom a little bit more professionally.
Yep.
Lauren Gable, another player. Jill Saunier came over from the Sirens in a trade, was a part of the aforementioned, tussle with Teresa Vanishova. So that's interesting. When it comes to blue liners, I mean, Megan Keller, right?
Right.
I mean, come on. I don't even know that we need to talk about it, but we will. A national team player, great size, definitely has moxie. If you want some sandpaper, having a player like Keller on your team will take you a long way, but also someone that can find the net. Rachel has a knack for the net, certainly can get involved in the offense, even as a defender.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was absolutely critical that they protect her. And she is going to be, I would say, along with one of the draft picks, the key part of this Boston Fleet blue line going into next season. So to get her a contract extension was really important. Along with Daniela Peshova, I think is another important aspect of it. She's a returning player that was on an existing deal, 2 years left in that one.
Mm-hmm. And, we talked about Frankel in a few different ways already. Key piece here, protected player, and you completely understand why.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And Frankel is someone who, if you go back, those who've been around women's hockey for a while, I love that we've moved from will Frankel get some minutes with the national squad to now she's absolutely no questions asked a protected player in, the PWHL, now the domestic league here in the United States. So you love seeing that full arc for a lot of these players. I wouldn't say even full arc. We've still got a lot to go with Aerin Frankel, and coming back healthy, and rejuvenated, really refocused, I think will be huge. All right. So we do know there are a few players that are unrestricted free agents. Kelly Babcock, I mentioned a little. Olivia Zafuto. Now, those are players that I think are definitely more of your role players for sure, not just for Boston, but likely at this point in the PWHL, if we're being honest here. And, that's just, again, some of what maybe is contributing to the shift, or definitely, I would say, it just varies player to player. But this is a part of, the shifting landscape when it comes to women's hockey. Then there's Amanda Pelkey, who I think is an interesting player as well. Comes from the OGs that were around for the CWHL even, and the Boston Blades, played with USA Hockey, suffered an injury, a player that's definitely more on the veteran side when it comes to years put in. So that contributing with being out with injury for a while, you just never know. Especially as the league is continuing to grow, what decisions will be made or what the value added is for a player like Pelkey at this point in time. I think there is absolutely a world in which Pelkey can find a spot, whether that's with Boston or someone else. And, I think, again, as we see young talent coming in, maybe that is not, as much of a guarantee as it was even 2 years ago, Rachel.
Yeah, she could retire. Who knows? Maybe it's time. So I don't know. We have not heard either way about her status moving forward.
No, we haven't. And just, again, retirement for sure is something we might see. Contemporaries of hers that she's played throughout her career, we're starting to see more of them retire. So again, you never know. But coming up next, though, on the Women's Hockey Report, we want to get into what this team could look like. So that means, of course, we're going to talk about who they picked up in free agency, the entry draft, and then we will close out giving what cities we think either the PWHL should return to or explore for the first time, given that there might be upwards of 16 games, Rachel, that don't have a destination on the calendar per season. Ticket holders will get into that coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. This episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. And listen, I love a futures bet. And if you're like me, then you're going to want to circle August 26th, the official FanDuel Futures Day. This is a brand new holiday. Now, it is for football fans, but maybe we can grow it to be quarterly or something like that. This is for fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only on FanDuel. So FanDuel, play your game. And we are back, Rachel, with the Women's Hockey Report. We talked about some movement, of course, with the Boston Fleet. We talked about key returners. And in just a little bit, we will have you as our roster expert, Rachel, do some configuring and give your best bet on what you think the lines and defensive pairings might look like. But first, we have to fill in some holes here because we saw some players walk out the door. We talked about those. But we also know that some players were picked up in free agency as well as in the entry draft. Of course, the Boston Fleet being an original team, they wouldn't have gained anyone through the expansion draft, but they were able to sign players that may have been impacted by the expansion draft. This one, we're going to go with 3 forwards right off the hop here. Liz Sheppers, I think, is a really fascinating name. Now, Minnesota Frost fans might not want to hear it, especially because of the role Liz has played in the past 2 seasons and championships, very specifically. But I think this could be a really good get for Boston.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, replacing Hillary Knight is impossible, but if you're going to pick up a player in free agency that's going to kickstart your offense here, Liz Sheppers is that player. I think, along with the other stuff that they're doing, I think that was a really good move by them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there that honestly has gone underrated, which seems impossible. And yet here we are, Rachel. So keep an eye on Liz Sheppers. We called it here on the Women's Hockey Report. Chloe Rurard, coming from the New York Sirens, and Laura Klug from the Toronto Scepters, both sign in free agency 2-year deals, or 1-year deals for both of them.
Yeah, again, they needed some bodies for the bodies that went away, but I think these are also good pickups. I think they're just good depth players that will help contribute. I think I was more concerned about what was going on the blue line side of things. And that's where I was like, Zoe Boyd, love that. Love that. Huge part of the Ottawa Charge blue line this past season. And I think between her and Rylan McKinnon, who, coming from Toronto, those are really good veteran players. And I say veteran for this league, just existing players in this league, but two very good defenders.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, and again, it seems like there's a vision here for Boston, and they are filling in players who are going to contribute in very specific ways. Not necessarily, Rachel, what we talked about the other week, where there's some versatility perhaps for other teams. So I think that's interesting. Maybe that speaks to the versatility that perhaps already exists on the roster, but that's definitely something that I noticed. And then we talked about goaltending. There's some goaltenders that opted to go back to Europe, and we saw that the Boston Fleet decided to pick up Abby Levy from the New York Sirens. Now, New York is such an interesting team overall, and I think the goaltending speaks in a lot of ways to what we probably felt about the rest of the roster, in that you had some players that on paper you absolutely are like, yes, you want them on your squad. And then there were times where the execution just faltered. And when you're a goaltender and execution either in front of you, in your own game, but especially when it's a combination of both of those things, it can just really enhance and amplify an above average game, but it also can enhance and amplify a below average game. And we've said this about Schroeder, and I felt this way about Levy at times as well. We have seen phenomenal performances from Abby Levy, to the point where I was thinking at a time, is Schroeder, a young version, a new to pro hockey version of what we were seeing in Minnesota, where you can have two goaltenders really riff off of each other. But then there were times, Rachel, where you didn't really know what you were going to get from Levy or Schroeder.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was consistency was the issue. And yes, a lot of it could be, said that it was the play of the skaters in front of these goaltenders, because there was a lack of consistency there. And next week is, Sirens Week, and we'll get more into that. But I think with Abby Levy, you're getting a solid backup. And I'm very interested to see, now that we kind of have a sense of what this Fleet blue line looks like and what the lineup looks like overall, will Abby Levy find some more success there? But it'll depend if she is the official backup or she's the third stringer. And there's some competition there that they got in the draft.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of the draft, let's get into it. So, you talked about this, so I'm gonna lay off right into your assessment, because blue line is what you were concerned about, and blue line, is where they go with their first pick.
Right, and that was Haley Winn, who, best pick, honestly. I'm so thrilled for them. She was the top pairing right defender at Clarkson, a top flight program, just an excellent defender coming into the league, where she's like a rare defender to me, that I think she can go from college to pro and just slot right in on the top pairing and be fine. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, first round, second pick overall. This is huge. Again, because of all the things that we've already talked about, Rachel. I will say they also pick up Riley Bregman in the fourth round, 26th pick overall, a defender from the Ohio State University. Okay. So we'll talk about Riley a little bit later when it comes to, how you think this team might break down. But, Bregman, I think another good get here. In the second round, don't stay on the blue line, but they pick up a forward from the WCHA. How do you like this pick, Rachel, with Ella Huber?
Yeah, so she was the 1C for University of Minnesota. So that's like a top position on a top team. She is, as of recording, the only draft pick to have signed with the Boston Fleet yet. She signed a 2-year deal this week. And, she had 48 points this past season. She was captain of the University of Minnesota. And I just think she's going to bring a lot to the table here, especially, to shore up some of the missing pieces in the offense here. I definitely think she could 3C this team. And I think that's a great place for her to start out her rookie year.
For sure. We move on in the third round. Olivia Mobley, forward from Minnesota Duluth. Riley Bregman, defender from OSU, Ohio State, talked about that a little bit. Fourth round, 26th pick overall. And then, a pick in the fifth round that got a lot of attention, lots of feel-good moments for the draft broadcast. That was Abby Newhook, forward from Boston College. And then they round out their pick, as you alluded to, or they rounded out their picks, I should say, as you alluded to, with a goaltender, and that is Amanda Thiel, goaltender from Ohio State University. Buckeyes well represented here in the Boston picks. Who stands out to you the most, do you think, Rachel, as far as how their success, like you said with Haley Winn, could translate not only to the PWHL, but what we think this Boston Fleet team probably needs?
Right. So we saw that they lost so many defenders in this whole expansion free agency process. Now, I think the Zoe Boyd pickup was important because she can play both sides and has in this league really well. So, I do see her as a second pairing defender here, probably with Peshova, but we'll see if Rylan McKinnon moves up as well, because she also has some flexibility and can do both. She's primarily a right defender, but can do both. And then, we'll see what happens with Hadley Hartmetz, who's returning, whether she can crack the lineup or it's Bregman who gets that additional spot in the starting six. But I do think that they're going to have a real solid blue line on this team overall.
Yeah, and then that would put Keller with Winn, of course, in your estimation.
Yep, as the top pairing there.
Yeah,
now,
for sure.
The goaltending battle with Amanda Thiele, I think that's going to be the interesting battle between Thiele and Abby Levy, because I think Ohio State is a very, very good program, but you do not see Thiele at the top or near the top of any of the stat sheets. Like, you don't, like around women's hockey. She was the top goaltender for Ohio State, a 2.21 goals against average, an 887 save percentage. Now, is it a product partially of the system that Ohio State played? A little bit. But I do think she's an excellent goaltender. It's just that, like, the numbers weren't quite there, I think, to consider her like an elite level goaltender. And so that's where I think the battle between her and Abby Levy could get interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting training camp. Let's go to the forward group here. Mueller returns, Brandt, Rattray, Toppany, we've talked about, Maloney, Saunier. Do you think there's a packed in group that will likely be able to stay together, or at least, will have that continuity from last season to the upcoming season?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of continuity. Now, obviously, without Knight there's some other players that move up, but this is where Huber gets a chance to fold in at 3C to get her feet wet in the league. Olivia Mobley could end up on the third line or fourth line, depending on how things come out in the wash. Sophie Shirley had some time way up the lineup. Will she keep it there, or is she going to get bumped down because they brought in Chloe Arard, and then with Liz Sheppers in there? I think Sheppers could also play the 3C role, but they could put her out on the wing as well. There's a lot of options and a lot of flexibility here on the forward side of things for Boston this upcoming year. And that's where I think they can work to their advantage. Will it take some time to figure it out? And could there be some stumbling along the way? Sure. But I do think they have a lot of options on the table.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned, again, something that I talked about before is like, the flexibility comes from what already exists, as opposed to something that they needed to bring in, at least for the forward group. I think maybe a little bit more of that we were seeing on the blue line. But we also, as you had mentioned, we know that the blue line was perhaps a little bit more of a point of emphasis because of what walked out of the door. I think it's going to be an interesting season. Also, apologies, Thiele, for pronouncing your name wrong. I that was on me. Yeah. Glad Rachel's here to clean up my messes.
Listen, I mispronounce names all the time, so
I know.
It's fine.
I mean, and it's fine. I will acknowledge it so that, the people yelling in the comments, I see you. I understand. I get it. That's on me. But again, another great rundown here. We're going to close out this episode with just a few things, again, including the takeover tour stops. But before we close with Boston, what do you see as the realistic expectations, or maybe what's best case scenario, do you think, for this Boston team that has had to retool in a few places?
My question is, what is the PWHL going to do about the playoffs, and who gets into the playoffs? How many teams? How is it going to work? Because I think, honestly, that will determine whether or not Boston makes the playoffs. I think if there's more teams in the playoffs, they have a better chance. If it's 6 of the 8 teams that make the playoffs, I think they'll have a better chance.
What it sounds like is that you kind of see maybe they're shooting for like a last in, first out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I think that we have a few teams that we still have to talk about. We are going to go back to the expansion teams. I know we've talked about them before, but now that we've seen the dust settle, we've got more through free agency, we're going to talk about those. Even given the teams that we have left to talk about, Rachel, I think there's at least 2 of those teams that are going to likely, if we look on paper, if on paper plays out, right, then there's probably at least 2 of the next 3 teams that we're going to talk about that could be more competitive than Boston, which is wild because
I mean,
is it the
maybe
same? Of course, we know it's the same. The 2 of
maybe there's a curveball and everybody makes the playoffs.
Oh, wow. You know, honestly, I hadn't even given that any second of thought.
I mean, you have 8 teams. Why not just make a tournament, end of season tourney? Let's go.
I mean,
anybody can take it.
That would be
possible.
Chaos, and I would kind of be here for it. And then I think, honestly, if it sounds, this is why I love this, and I love that you mentioned this and got my raw reaction. But if you do that, then it also future-proofs playoff format, even if you add expansion teams, which seems like the league wants to continue to do.
Yeah, I think so. It's
just make it 8.
Honestly, anything can happen here.
Anything can happen. I mean, I don't know. We might have to come back to this, Rachel. I like this conversation a lot. Let us know in the chat. What do you feel about it? Should all 8 teams make the playoffs in season 3? Yay or nay? And let us know in the comments. Oh, I like this a lot. Joe, make sure you clip this. Make sure you clip this for social media. I gotta know what the people think about this. But right now, the people, we're gonna take this one on and tell you what we think about the reporting we saw from the Hockey News that according to you, season ticket holders, and the information curated and collected, there are upwards of 16 games, Rachel, that are unaccounted for in this schedule that, at least to the public, does not exist. But again, season ticket holders know how many home games they are expected to have and that they're paying for. So I think this is really interesting sleuthing here by the Hockey News. But the conversation we're going to have is, what are the cities, Rachel, that you absolutely want to see? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to, on the spot to give 16 cities. I think we'll probably also see some overlap. I think that's very possible. But I mean, what are like 3 cities that you absolutely want to see?
Well, so here's the thing. Looking at the cities that they went to this past year, I think we know what's going on with those cities. I think that, do we need more data on any of those cities? Probably not. Probably not. Have some of those cities earned a return because they didn't get expansion teams? Also probably true. So I think if we're going to return to any of those cities from this past year, I would say Detroit would be one of them. For sure.
That makes sense. I mean, Detroit was pretty upset that they didn't get an expansion team.
Right. And I think Denver also should get a return. I think those are the 2 cities that I would say should get a return. I also think Quebec City should, just because you always got to throw them a bone, honestly. You just do. That's
fair. Yeah, Quebec City, I think, is good. I honestly would like to see women's hockey return to I put down RDU, like Raleigh, Durham area, North Carolina. That was just a lot of fun. So maybe I hear what you're saying though. Like, do we need more information on those cities? I mean, maybe not. But to what end, I guess. And that's where expansion, especially because as someone who covers the WNBA, expansion and even relocation is taking a very interesting shift when it comes to the narrative and the conversation. But I think that this is still exploratory phase is the impression that I get for the PWHL. I do wonder though, if a city that wasn't a part of last year's takeover tour, but has been a part of women's hockey neutral site games, if Pittsburgh will be a city that maybe the PWHL returns to, women's hockey returns to. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think Pittsburgh has been a city that, again, has been a part of, these discovery exploratory phases for a while. Is this perhaps the most viable or the most, the league that, anyone that would be on board from the city or the outskirts are they more interested in this league? Because that's been maybe some of the hiccup when it comes to Pittsburgh expansion, that they wanted to be, with a particular league or whatnot, or just not with the existing infrastructure, more likely is how we would put it, because PWHL didn't exist back in those days. Way back in those days, Rachel, like 7 years ago. So I think Pittsburgh could be another one.
Yeah, I think as far as like new or going back to places that either the PWHPA has been to before, I think Pittsburgh is definitely one of them. I think Philadelphia is certainly one of them. There's like a new arena that's going to be built. They've got a WNBA expansion team in the works. Yeah. So why not hockey? They did visit, the PWHPA did do a visit there, but since the PWHL started, they have not as of yet. I think that would be certainly interesting. I think anywhere in Texas would be great.
Wow, that
like
would be interesting.
Like go to Houston. That would be crazy and different.
Well, apparently that's where the W wants to.
I know the W wants to go there. The NHL keeps threatening to go there. Why not have the PWHL be the first to come into town and say, yeah. I think Vegas would be a ton of fun.
Ooh, that could be fun.
Yeah. And Winnipeg.
Do you think Arizona even has a shot, given how... Didn't even let me finish the question. I mean, we've seen what they weren't able to do, I guess, on the men's side. Does that change for a women's landscape? I mean, for women's hockey, probably not. I don't think they're even really on the radar for any other women's sports. So, Arizona, you got work to do. Because I don't know if you know, but women's sports is where it's at. Fastest growing market right now, because I mean, how could it not be? I could get into that, but we'll save that for one of my other podcasts. But I like that. And now it's your turn, listeners, viewers, let us know. Where do you want to see the PWHL go? I think also what we could see is some of these 16 games that we've seen reported, or 16 home games, maybe they go to larger venues, or they try to do something innovative. Do they try an outdoor game? Is it time for a PWHL outdoor game? I don't know. Maybe. Not in Texas, though.
Well, they could do it in Florida, that's for sure.
Well, yeah.
This upcoming year. So they got a couple chances for that to partner with the NHL.
Well, speaking of Florida, thank you so much for the segue as we get ready to close out this episode. Florida has been the home for teams that don't have ice sheets to play in the summer, actually, at the Florida Panthers Ice Den, and that is through the Amerigo Latam Cup. It is traditionally a tournament that has been for teams that either have federation teams on the roller hockey side, but no ice hockey teams, and they're trying to integrate, but also an opportunity for what we call heritage teams, where teams or countries, federations can find players throughout North America that want to compete under the heritage of their family, whether that's Greece, Puerto Rico, teams from Cuba, we have teams from Egypt, etc. Pakistan is joining this year again.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's been a great tournament. This will be my 4th year being on the broadcast team. So check out the Amerigo Latam Cup. It will start up this Saturday. The tickets, if you are in Florida, you can come to the Ice Den August 17th through the 24th in Coral Springs, Florida. However, again, we will have broadcasters. I will be one of them, and you can listen on Flow Hockey, and usually we stream for free. We don't have the final updated information, but be sure to follow the Women's Hockey Report, and we will make sure to have any links. Of course, you can also follow me as well, because I will be there. And hopefully, Rachel, by the time we record our next episode, my voice won't be absolutely frayed from calling all of the games, but it's such a fun tournament. Bleacher Report did a feature on the women's hockey team from Puerto Rico, and they interviewed me. You can check that out on Bleacher Report, but it's a fun time. It's always a good time. Again, some of these teams are very competitive and trying to get accreditation for IHF. Others are there for the vibes. And then there's the young ones too. There's some youth brackets as well. So it's a good family fun. And yes, please do check it out on Flow Hockey. I will be one of your broadcasters. But Rachel alluded to this. The next time we hop on the mics, we're going to talk about the New York Sirens. And, as much as, there's the stories pretty much tells itself on the ice, Rachel, I do think that they've had the most interesting offseason, and maybe because they kind of needed to.
That is for sure. Excited to get into my hometown team.
That's it. Well, we will do that next week. Again, please do subscribe, comment. We want to hear where you think the PWHL takeover tour should stop. We want to know what you think about our rundowns, etc. And so let us know. Let us know in the comments, and we will catch you on the next episode, dropping every Saturday morning on the Locked On NHL channel. For Rachel Donner, Erica L Ayala here. We will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.